The contract was written in another man's handwriting, and Eva Prescott had been living inside its terms for 3 years before she finally understood every word of it. The summer of 1878 pressed down on the Texas hill country like a flat iron on wet linen, and the little homestead outside Caldwell County sweated under it the same as everything else. The pecan trees along the creek bend had gone dusty and still. The chickens moved slow and low to the ground, the way they always did before a dry wind came through. And Eva Prescott sat on the porch step in the purple-gray light of early evening with a single oil lamp burning beside her knee, a sheet of folded paper open across her thighs, reading aloud to her 2 boys as though the words were a bedtime story. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Thomas, who was 9 and had his father's jaw but his mother's dark eyes, sat on the step above her with his elbows resting on his knees and his chin in both palms. He was listening the way children listen, when they understand the weight of something without understanding its meaning. Samuel, who was 6 and still had that round softness to his face that the frontier had not yet burned away, was pressed against his mother's side with his fingers twisted around a loose thread on her apron. He did not understand most of the words, but he understood his mother's voice. He leaned into it. Eva read. The property herein described, being 160 acres of land in Caldwell County, state of Texas, together with the dwelling, the outbuildings, and all livestock thereon, shall remain under the management and financial obligation of one Harlan Prescott, and upon his death or incapacity, said obligation shall pass in full to whatever party holds the note issued by the Caldwell County Land and Commerce Trust on the date of November the 14th, 1875. The widow of Harlan Prescott, being Eva Marin Prescott née Calloway, may remain on said property only so long as she continues to make satisfactory payment against the outstanding note and does not fall into arrears exceeding 90 days, at which time the holding party may exercise all rights of reclamation. She paused. Thomas looked up at her. What does reclamation mean? It means they take the land back, Eva said quietly. Samuel's fingers tightened on the apron thread. But it is our land, Thomas said, not a question, a declaration, the kind of thing 9-year-old boys say when they are trying on courage. It is, Eva said, and we are going to keep it. She folded the paper back along its old creases and held it in her lap. The lamp flame trembled a little in the warm evening air. Out past the fence line, the last of the daylight was going out of the sky like a candle being pinched between 2 fingers, leaving only a deep orange smear along the western horizon. That was when she heard the horse. She did not stand up right away. Strangers came through sometimes, riders cutting across the lower pasture toward the creek ford, travelers on their way to Lockhart or beyond. She had learned in the 3 years since Harlan's death to hear the difference between a horse that was passing through and a horse that was coming to stop. This one was slowing down. She set her hand on Thomas's knee without turning around. Go inside and take your brother. Thomas hesitated the way he always did, trying to be the man of the house. Thomas, she said, softer this time. He took Samuel by the wrist and pulled him through the front door, and Eva heard the creak of the hinges and then the quiet latch of it closing behind them. She stood up slowly, folded the contract into her apron pocket, and turned to face whoever was coming up her road. The man on the horse was not what she expected, though she was not certain what she had expected. He was tall in the saddle, the way some men are who have been riding long enough that the horse and the man become one kind of thing. His hat was dark with trail dust and pulled low, but not so low that she could not see the set of his jaw and the line of his mouth, which was not unkind. He was riding a bay quarter horse, strong-built and sure-footed, and behind his saddle was a bedroll and a canvas saddlebag that looked like it had been packed and unpacked more times than he could count. He pulled up at the gate post and looked at her. She looked back. "Evening," he said. "Evening," she said. He reached into his coat and her hand moved without thinking toward the rifle she kept just inside the door, propped against the interior wall. But what he pulled out was not a weapon. It was a piece of paper, folded, official-looking, Something cold moved through her chest. "I am looking for the Prescott homestead," he said. "You found it." He looked at her steadily. She saw him take in the lamp on the step, the two sets of small boot prints in the dust of the yard, the dried herbs hanging above the door, the way she was standing in front of her house like she had grown up out of the ground itself. He looked down at the paper in his hand. "My name is Isaiah Dalton," he said. "I ride for the Caldwell County Land and Commerce Trust. I have been asked to deliver this notice and to—" He stopped. He looked at the paper again. He looked back at her. Something shifted in his expression that she could not name yet. "To oversee the reclamation of this property." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Eva did not flinch. She had been waiting for this word for 3 years. She had been dreading it and preparing for it and dreading it again. And now that it was here standing at her gate post in the shape of a dusty cowboy with a piece of paper in his hand, she found that she was less afraid than she was furious. "On what grounds?" she said. It was not a question, it was a demand. "Arrears exceeding 90 days, he said. "The trust has. I have not missed a payment." He stopped. "I have not missed a single payment in 3 years, she said. "Not one. I have the receipts. Every one of them dated and signed by the trust's own clerk going back to the month Harlan died." He looked at the paper in his hand again. The furrow between his brows deepened. He folded the paper and put it back inside his coat. "May I step down?" he asked. She considered him. The horse was calm. The man seemed calm. But she had learned that calm was not the same as trustworthy, not out here, not in this county. "Step down," she said. "But you come no closer than the gate." He swung down from the saddle with the ease of a man who had done it 10,000 times, looped the reins over the post, and stood with his hands visible at his sides. That small gesture, that deliberate showing of his hands told her something. A man who was there to threaten her would not have done it. "Who told you there were arrears?" she asked. "My employer. A man named Garrett Cole. He holds the note now. He acquired it from the original trust about 8 months ago." Eva was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Garrett Cole." "Yes, ma'am, he bought the note." "He did." She pressed her lips together and looked past him toward the road, not seeing it. She was thinking. She was thinking about the fact that Garrett Cole was one of the largest landowners in Caldwell County, and that her creek ford ran along the southern boundary of her property, and that for the last 2 summers she had seen Cole's cattle grazing dangerously close to that boundary line. She was thinking about the fact that Cole's foreman had come to her door 6 months ago asking in a polite but very pointed way whether she had ever considered selling. She had not considered it. She had said so. She was thinking about what it meant that Cole now held her note and had apparently sent this man to take her land on the grounds of arrears that did not exist. "Come to the gate," she said. "I want to show you something." He came. She went inside without turning her back to him fully and came back with a tin box, the kind with a clasp lid that people used to keep important papers in. She set it on the fence post and opened it and pulled out a ribbon-tied bundle of receipts. "Every payment," she said, 37 of them, signed by the trust clerk, a man named William Oates, whose signature you will recognize if you have been working for the trust even half as long as your coat suggests. He took the bundle carefully. He untied the ribbon. He looked at the receipts one by one, methodically, with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely reading and not just pretending to. The lamplight from the step made his face look warmer than the evening deserved, and Eva watched the expressions move across it the way weather moves across open country, a cloud here, a shift of light there. He tied the ribbon back around the bundle and held it out to her. "These are legitimate," he said. "I know they are." He put his hands back at his sides and was quiet for a moment. The horse stamped once behind him. Out by the creek, a nightjar started its evening calling. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, and his voice had changed. It was lower, more careful. "I need to tell you something that may or may not come as a surprise." "Tell it," she said. "I have been doing this work for 3 years," he said. "Writing for land trusts and note holders and property companies across 4 counties. I have delivered a lot of notices, and I have been asked more times than I am comfortable with to deliver notices that were not entirely—" He stopped. chose a word. Accurate. Eva looked at him. Are you telling me that you knew? I am telling you that I suspected, he said. When Cole gave me this particular job, something about it did not sit right. He was too eager. He told me to ride out fast before the end of the week and not to get into lengthy conversations with the widow. Those were his exact words. He paused. I do not work well with instructions like that. Eva was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, what does he want? The creek ford. The lower 40 acres along the water. He is trying to expand his cattle operation and he needs a reliable water source. Your land gives him that. He has been trying to acquire it through purchase and that did not work, so now he is trying through legal pressure. Using fraudulent arrears claims. Using fraudulent arrears claims, he confirmed. The night had settled fully around them now. The lamp was the brightest thing in the immediate world and it threw their shadows long and uneven across the yard. What are you going to do? Eva asked. He reached back into his coat and took out the reclamation notice. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at her. Do you have a fire burning inside? He asked. She was still. Then she nodded. He opened the gate, picked up the notice, folded it once with great deliberateness and held it out to her. I would be grateful, he said, if you would put that in your fire. She took it from his hand. Their fingers did not touch. But the air between them did something that she would think about later, lying awake in her dark bedroom with the boys asleep in the next room, the way air sometimes changed just before rain. Come inside, she said. I will put coffee on. He tied his horse to the post properly this time, with water from the trough, and he came inside. The house was small, but it was clean in the way that only people who have made something out of nothing know how to keep clean, not spotless, because spotless was not possible on a working homestead, but ordered. The table had been scrubbed until the wood had gone pale. The shelves were built uneven but solid. On the windowsill there were 2 dried wildflowers in a blue glass bottle, the kind of thing that served no function except to say that someone here still cared about beauty despite everything. Isaiah sat at the table and put his hat on his knee and watched Eva Prescott walk to the fire. She put the reclamation notice in the flames and they both watched it burn. It went fast, curling at the edges and then the center, and the ash that fell was fine and gray. She went to the kitchen end of the room and put coffee on the iron stove. He did not say anything. She did not either, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between 2 people who are both trying to think clearly in the presence of something that makes thinking difficult. Thomas appeared in the doorway to the back room, barefoot in his nightshirt. Mama, go back to bed, Thomas. Thomas looked at Isaiah with those dark, watchful eyes of his. Isaiah looked back without flinching or performing anything. He simply met the boy's gaze the way you would meet any serious person's gaze, with respect and honesty. Who is he? Thomas asked. A man who came to bring some papers, Eva said. He brought them and we are done with them. Go to bed. Thomas studied Isaiah for another 3 seconds, which is a long time when a 9-year-old boy is doing it, and then disappeared back into the dark room. The coffee came and Eva poured 2 cups and sat down across the table from Isaiah Dalton. She did not offer him food even though she had some, because that would mean something different than coffee and she was not there yet. Tell me about Cole, she said. Tell me everything you know. He did. He talked for a long time about Garrett Cole's land acquisitions over the past 5 years, about the pattern he had seen in how Cole targeted widows and older homesteaders, about the fact that Cole had a relationship with the county assessor that was closer than it ought to be, about the 3 other properties he knew of that had been pressured in ways similar to what Eva was now experiencing. Eva listened with her hands around her coffee cup and her eyes on his face. She was measuring him. She was good at measuring people. She had learned from necessity. When he was done, she asked, "Why are you telling me all this?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said. "Because I am tired." "Tired of what?" "Of doing the other thing," he said simply. There was a weight behind those words that was not small, and Eva heard it. She did not press it. There were things you could ask a stranger on the first night and things you could not. "You quit," she said. It was not quite a question. "As of tonight," he said. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. The fire popped softly. The lamp between them put gold light on both their faces. "Where will you go?" she asked. He turned his hat on his knee once. "I have not decided." She got up and refilled his coffee without asking. He said thank you. She sat back down. They talked a little longer about less consequential things: the drought, the road conditions, the nearest town with a reliable blacksmith. And then it was late and she told him there was a clean stall in the barn and that the well was good if he needed it. He thanked her. He put on his hat. He said good night with a politeness that had nothing stiff in it, and he went out to his horse. Eva stood at the door for a moment and watched him cross the yard in the lamplight. She was not certain what she was thinking. She was not certain what she was feeling either. She only knew that the contract was still in her apron pocket, and that someone had just burned the document that threatened everything she had built, and that it had happened so quietly and so quickly that she almost could not believe it had happened at all. She went to bed. She lay awake for a long time. In the morning she found that he had repaired the fence rail along the east paddock before she was up. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the neat new board and the straight line of it, and felt something very particular move through her chest, something she had not felt in a long time and did not immediately have a name for. She made extra biscuits. When he came in from the barn, she set a plate in front of him without comment and went about feeding the boys and packing Thomas's lunch pail for the walk to school. She could feel him watching her the way you feel weather, not seeing it but knowing it is there. "You do not have to leave today," she said with her back to him, tying Samuel's shoes, "if you have no particular place to go." There was a pause. "I am handy enough," he said, "if there is work that needs doing." She straightened up and turned around. There is always work that needs doing. So he stayed. He stayed one day and then two and then a week. He fixed the paddock fence properly, all of it, not just the broken rail. He cleared the drainage ditch along the north field that had been clogging since spring. He reshod the older draft horse, a 16-year-old gray named August who had been favoring his left front for months. He did not ask Eva where she wanted things or tell her what she ought to do. He looked at what needed doing and he did it, and then he came to her at the end of the day and told her what he had done and what materials he had used, as if she were the one running the operation, which she was. She did not soften toward him all at once. She was not that kind of woman. But she watched him with her boys and something in her shifted slowly, the way river banks shift, not dramatically, but so thoroughly that eventually you look up and realize the whole shape of things has changed. Thomas watched him with the horses one afternoon and came inside and told his mother, very seriously, that Isaiah knew what he was doing around a barn. Samuel, less restrained, had taken to following Isaiah at a distance of approximately 3 feet wherever he went on the property, like a small determined shadow. Isaiah bore this with a gravity and gentleness that Eva found unexpectedly moving. On the 8th day, she went into Lockhart. She left the boys with old Me Ferris, who lived 2 miles down the road and who had been a friend of her mother's, and who, when told that Eva had a ranch hand staying, narrowed her eyes and said, "Is he decent?" "Decent enough," Eva said. Me Ferris said that was more than most and left it at that. Eva went to the county clerk's office and spent 2 hours reviewing the land records associated with her property and the note that had been sold to Garrett Cole. She found what she had expected to find, and also several things she had not expected to find, including the fact that the original transfer of the note from the Caldwell County Land and Commerce Trust to Cole had been recorded with a discrepancy in the outstanding balance, a discrepancy that worked in Cole's favor by a significant margin, and that had been certified by the county assessor, whose name was Marcus Hale and who, as Isaiah had told her, had a relationship with Cole that was closer than it ought to be. She sat in the clerk's office for a long time and thought about her options. She went to see the only lawyer in Lockhart whose name she knew, a man named Frederick Marsh, who had an office above the dry goods store and a reputation for being honest, which in 1878 in Caldwell County was a reputation that did not come cheap. He listened to her. He looked at the documents she had brought. He pulled on his ear the way lawyers do when they are thinking, and then he said, "Mrs. Prescott, you have a defensible case. The discrepancy in the balance transfer combined with your complete payment records creates a very strong argument that Cole's claim was fraudulent from the beginning." "What would it take to pursue it?" she asked. He told her what it would take. The money part she did not have. The courage part she did, in abundance. She rode home in the long afternoon heat thinking about money and land and what a person could lose and what a person could not afford to. When she came through the gate, Isaiah was coming out of the barn and Thomas was on his shoulders, laughing, which was not something Thomas did with abandon very often. She pulled up and looked at the two of them, man and boy, the late sun blazing gold on everything, and felt that nameless thing in her chest again, larger now and warmer. Isaiah put Thomas down when he saw her. He came to take the horse's bridle. "How did it go?" he asked. She swung down from the saddle. "I need to talk to you." They sat on the porch after supper after the boys were in bed in the cool that the evening finally allowed. She told him everything she had learned in Lockhart. She told him about the balance discrepancy. She told him about Marsh's assessment. She told him about the money she did not have. He listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How much does Marsh need to take the case?" she told him. He was quiet again. "Longer this time. I have been writing for land trust companies for 3 years," he said. "The pay was not bad. I have most of it still." He paused. "I do not spend much." Eva turned her head and looked at him in the dark. The moon was coming up over the east tree line, full and white and bright enough to see by. "Isaiah," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what it looks like, and I am not trying to, I am not asking for anything in return. He stopped, started again. "I spent 3 years helping men like Cole take land from people who deserved to keep it, and I told myself I was just doing a job and that the law was the law. But the law is not always right, and I have known that for a long time, and I did not do enough about it." He looked at her. "Let me do something about it now." Eva held his gaze for a long time. The nightjar was calling again by the creek, that same one or one just like it. "This is not penance," she said. "If you do this, you are not buying your way out of something you regret. You understand that?" "I understand that," he said. "And it does not give you any claim to this land or this family," she said. "That is not what this is." "I know what it is," he said. She looked at him. He was not looking away. There was something in his face that she could read now, after 8 days of watching it. An openness, an honesty, the kind that came from a man who had spent a long time not being those things and had decided to stop. "All right," she said. He went to Lockhart the next morning and he came back with a receipt from Frederick Marsh's office, and the case of Prescott versus Cole and the county assessor Marcus Hale began to take shape in the legal docket of Caldwell County. It was not quick. Nothing legal was quick in 1878. It took 3 months. In those 3 months, several things happened. Garrett Cole came to the property once. He rode up alone, which was either bravery or arrogance, and stood at the gate the same way Isaiah had stood at the gate on the first night, except that Cole's hands were not visible and his voice was not careful. He told Eva that she was making a mistake. He told her that Marsh was a small-time lawyer playing with a big-time opponent, and that she ought to think carefully about her boys and what kind of future she wanted for them. He said the word boys in a way that made the hair on the back of Eva's neck stand up. Isaiah came out of the barn while Cole was still talking. Cole looked at him, and something in Cole's expression shifted, not quite fear, but its useful neighbor caution. "Mr. Cole," Isaiah said pleasantly, coming to stand beside the gate post. "Frederick Marsh has asked that all communications regarding this matter go through his office. I believe you have his address." Cole looked at Isaiah for a long moment. Cole was in his mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had since been replaced by authority. He was not a man who was accustomed to being redirected, But there was something about Isaiah Dalton's stillness that was not comfortable to push against. It was not threatening, not overtly. It was simply present, complete, the kind of stillness that a man had when he had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Cole turned his horse and rode out. Eva and Isaiah stood at the gate and watched him go. "Thank you," she said. "He will not come back himself," Isaiah said. "He will send someone." He was right. 3 weeks later, 2 of Cole's men rode up the road after dark. They did not come to the gate. They stopped 100 yards out and turned around. Isaiah had been sitting on the porch in the dark and they had not seen him there, and when he stood up, they saw him and turned around. She did not know until the next morning, when he mentioned it casually over breakfast, that he had been sitting out there. She did not ask him why. She knew why. It sat in her chest differently than she expected it to. It sat there warmly. The boys were adjusting to his presence in ways that were both simple and complicated. Thomas, who had been carrying a weight on his small shoulders for 3 years that no 9-year-old should carry, had started to put it down in small increments, asking Isaiah questions about horses and fences and weather signs, asking the kind of questions that were really just the long way around asking someone to pay attention to them. Isaiah paid attention. He was not trying to be their father. He was just being present, and that turned out to be what they needed. Samuel, who was young enough to just accept things as they came, had started calling Isaiah the cowboy when talking about him to his mother. "The cowboy fixed the chicken house," he would report solemnly. "The cowboy says the creek is going to come up." This made Eva smile when Samuel was not looking, and sometimes when he was. There was an evening in October when a line of storms came through from the southwest, the kind that came fast and low with a green sky ahead of them and hail sometimes mixed with the rain. Eva had been through enough of these to know what needed doing. The horses in, the chickens in, the window shutters latched, the good grain covered in the barn. She and Isaiah worked side by side in the rising wind to get it all done before the first wall of rain hit. They got the last shutter latched and the barn door secured and made it to the porch just as the rain came down. It came down hard, the way Texas storms came down when they meant business, and the thunder was the kind that did not just crack but rolled, long and low and complete, shaking the air. They stood on the porch and watched it. The boys were inside already, pressed to the window. Eva was wet through from the last sprint across the yard. Her hair had come undone from its pins and was plastered dark against the side of her face. She was out of breath. She was laughing, just a little, the involuntary laugh that storms sometimes produced when you had outrun them and won. She turned to look at Isaiah and found him already looking at her. He was not laughing. He was looking at her with an expression that was very serious and very tender at the same time, and when she met his eyes she felt the world do something complicated and significant, the way it did sometimes when you understood that something had changed and could not be unchanged. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The rain poured, the thunder rolled. "Isaiah," she said. "I know," he said. "I am not ready," she said. "I know that too," he said. He looked back at the storm. She looked back at the storm. They stood there together in the wet dark and the noise and the light, 2 people in the middle of something larger than themselves, and they did not reach for each other. But they stood close. They stood so close that their shoulders nearly touched and neither of them moved away. Later she would think that was the moment, not the touching, the almost touching, the choosing to stay near. The legal case moved forward in November. Frederick Marsh was a methodical man, which Eva had initially found frustrating but had come to appreciate. He built the case the way you built a barn piece by piece, making sure each piece was right before adding the next. He documented the balance discrepancy in the note transfer. He collected testimony from 2 other homesteaders who had been pressured by Cole through similar means. He obtained records from the county assessor's office that showed a pattern of certification irregularities, all of them in Cole's favor, going back 4 years. Isaiah, who knew the inside workings of land trust operations better than almost anyone in the county, proved to be invaluable to Marsh's investigation. He spent 2 weeks in Lockhart, going over records and writing a detailed account of his own time working for the trust and for Cole, including specific transactions and specific instructions he had been given that now, laid out in plain language on paper, looked considerably less like legitimate business and considerably more like coordinated fraud. He came back to the homestead on a Friday evening with ink stains on his fingers and tired lines around his eyes. Eva opened the door when she heard his horse and stood in the doorway and looked at him coming up the path in the lamplight. "How bad is it?" she asked. For Cole, he managed a small, tired smile. "It is not good." She stepped aside to let him in. "Sit down. There is venison stew." He sat. She brought him the stew and bread and coffee, and he ate, and she sat across from him, and he told her what Marsh had found and what he thought was going to happen. "The county assessor is going to turn," he said. "Marsh is certain of it. When a man like Hale sees which way the water is running, he will move to protect himself. And the minute Hale turns, Cole loses his legal support in the county. Without that, his claim to your note, and the conditions he has been trying to enforce through it collapses." Eva absorbed this. "And the debt, the actual amount I owe. Marsh believes the court will find that Cole's calculation of the outstanding balance was fraudulent, and that you have, in fact, been meeting your obligation fully. There may also be a case for damages." He looked at her steadily. "You may end up owning this land free and clear before this is over." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I cannot think about that yet. I cannot think about it until it is real." "That is fair," he said. Thomas came out in his nightshirt, which was becoming something of a habit, and told Isaiah that he had fixed the loose shelf in the back room by himself, using a method Isaiah had shown him 2 weeks ago. Isaiah looked suitably impressed. "Did you use the cross brace?" Thomas nodded seriously. "Then it will hold," Isaiah said. Thomas went back to bed looking satisfied. Eva watched the doorway after he was gone and felt the thing in her chest again, that warm, unmistakable thing. "He is a good boy," Isaiah said, not looking at her. "He is," she said. "He has had to be." A pause. Then Isaiah said quietly, "His father." "Harlan was not a bad man," Eva said slowly. She had not talked about this with anyone outside her own head for a long time. "He was not cruel. He was just absent, even when he was here. And then he died." She turned her cup on the table. "He fell off a roof he had no business being on in the first place, trying to fix a leak instead of paying someone who knew what they were doing. That was Harlan, proud about the wrong things." She was quiet for a moment. "I grieved him. I did. But by the time he died, there had been so little of him left in our life that mostly I was grieving what was never quite there." Isaiah said nothing. He just listened. He was very good at listening, she had learned. He listened the way some people looked at something they wanted to understand fully and without looking away. "I was 22 when I married him," she said. "I am 28 now. I have been running this place alone for 3 years and she stopped. I am not the person I was at 22. "No," Isaiah said gently. "You are not." She looked at him. "How old are you?" 31, he said. "Where are you from?" "Kentucky, originally." "I left when I was 18. I have been in Texas for the last 6 years. "Family?" He shook his head once without elaboration. She did not push. There were things you could ask and things you waited to be given. The stove ticked as it cooled. The lamp burned low. "Isaiah," she said. He looked at her. "I want you to stay," she said. "Not as a hand. I mean," she stopped, started more carefully. "I want you to stay because I think I am falling in love with you, and I am terrified of that, and I am telling you anyway because I have spent 3 years being afraid of the right things, and I do not want to be afraid of the wrong ones." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time with that serious and tender expression she had first seen on the porch during the storm, and then he set down his coffee cup and said, "I rode up your road 3 weeks ago with a piece of paper I was going to use to take your home, and you stood at your door and held your ground and put that paper in the fire, and I thought." He stopped. He looked at his hands. He looked back at her. "I thought, this is the bravest person I have ever met. I thought, what kind of man have I been?" He paused. "I am trying to be a different kind," he said. Eva reached across the table and put her hand over his, just her hand over his, not dramatic. Not a declaration with fireworks. Just the simple, specific weight of her hand on his, and the way he turned his hand over under hers and held it, careful and complete, like something he did not intend to let go of. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. The November sun the following week was the kind that had no warmth in it but was very bright, and the hills west of the homestead had gone from green to gold to rust, and were beautiful in the cold, clear way that Texas hills in late autumn always were. Eva and Isaiah rode out to check the fence line along the southern boundary, the one that ran nearest to Cole's land, because 3 of her fence posts had been knocked over 2 nights ago and she wanted to know if it was weather or something else. It was something else. The posts had not fallen, they had been pulled and left lying. It was a message. Cole was still trying. Eva stood in the pasture and looked at the fallen posts and felt a cold anger move through her that was not panic and was not fear. It was something cleaner than fear. "He is running out of legal options, so he is moving to harassment," Isaiah said. "He can harass me all he likes," she said. "He is not going to get this fence line." They spent the afternoon resetting the posts, the 2 of them together, in the pale November sun, working in the comfortable way of people who have learned each other's rhythms. He dug and she steadied, and they tamped the earth back together, and neither of them wasted words. There was something deeply satisfying about it that Eva could not have entirely articulated, not just the accomplishment of the work, but the fact of doing it beside him. At one point he said, "Eva." She looked up from tamping earth around the last post. "When this is settled," he said, and he was looking at the horizon over the fence, not at her, "I would like to ask you something." She straightened. "What would you like to ask?" He looked at her then. There was a color in his face from the cold air and the work, and something behind his eyes that was careful and honest. "I would like to ask you whether you would be willing to let me court you properly," he said. "After everything is settled, when you can think about it clearly without all of this over your head." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are already courting me, Isaiah. You have been for a month." Something in his face released, like a tension he had not known he was holding. "Yes," he said, "I suppose I have." "Properly," she said, which made him laugh, a genuine laugh, and that was the first time she had heard that from him, and it was a good sound. They rode back to the homestead in the long late afternoon light, and Eva thought about the shape of her life, which had been for 3 years a matter of survival and endurance and holding on, and the way it had begun, quietly and without her entirely noticing, to become something else. Something with more possibility in it, something with more warmth. The court proceedings came in December. Marsh had been right about Hale. The county assessor, faced with the volume of evidence that Marsh had assembled, had quietly turned and agreed to testify that the balance discrepancy in the note transfer had been, in his words, an administrative error for which he bore responsibility. The language was lawyerly, but the meaning was clear enough. He had been in Cole's pocket and was now in no one's pocket because there were no more pockets to be in. The hearing was held in the Caldwell County Courthouse, which was a building that smelled of pine resin and old paper, and the particular cold of Texas winters, which was not the cold of the North but had its own chill. Eva sat at the plaintiff's table with Frederick Marsh and held herself very still. Isaiah sat in the gallery behind her. She could feel him there, which was not a small thing. Cole was present. He was polished and controlled and represented by a lawyer from Austin who wore a coat that cost more than any single item Eva owned. But expensive coats did not make bad facts into good ones. Marsh presented the evidence methodically and completely. The balance discrepancy. The payment records. Isaiah's account of his instructions from Cole. The testimony of the other homesteaders. Hale's admission. 2 additional clerks from the trust's original office who had signed off on Eva's payments and were prepared to confirm that every one of them had been made on time. Cole's Austin lawyer did his best. He suggested that the balance discrepancy was a clerical error compounded by subsequent misunderstanding, that Cole's instructions to his agents had been misinterpreted, that Isaiah Dalton was a disgruntled former employee with a personal stake in the outcome. He said this last part while looking at Isaiah in the gallery with a smirk that Eva did not like at all. Isaiah did not move. He sat with his hat on his knee and his hands quiet and his face giving nothing away, and the smirk died on the lawyer's face without finding purchase. The judge, a man named Andrew Titus who had been on the Caldwell County bench for 11 years and had seen enough of Cole's land operations to have developed certain views about them, took 2 hours to deliberate. He came back with a ruling that was clear and complete. The outstanding balance on the Prescott homestead note, as correctly calculated, had been fully satisfied by the payments on record. The property was to be released from the note effective immediately. The discrepancy in the balance transfer, as acknowledged by the county assessor, constituted fraud in the recording of a public instrument, and Cole was ordered to pay a penalty into the county fund. The additional evidence concerning Cole's pattern of predatory acquisition was referred to the district attorney for further investigation. Eva sat at the plaintiff's table and heard the words and did not let herself cry because she had not cried in front of anyone in 3 years and today was not the day to start. But her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the table and breathed. Marsh put his papers into his case and said, "Mrs. Prescott, the land is yours." She nodded. She could not speak for a moment. And then Isaiah was beside her. She had not heard him come down from the gallery, had not heard anything after the judge's words, and he was standing next to her with his hat in his hand, and she turned and looked at him and he said quietly, "It is done." She took hold of the front of his coat with both hands, not pulling him, just holding on for a moment, and pressed her face briefly into her own hands and took a long breath. He put his hand on her back, lightly. Steadily, "It is done," she said. They rode home to the homestead in the cold December afternoon, Eva and Isaiah, and the hills were winter pale and beautiful, and the road was empty in the way that roads in that country were empty in December, and neither of them spoke much, but neither of them needed to. When they came through the gate of her land, free and clear, no note, no debt, no threat, Eva pulled her horse to a stop and just looked at the house. The pecan trees along the creek, bare now in winter. The fence line straight and solid. The smoke coming up from the chimney where Ferris had taken the boys for the day and lit the stove against the cold before she left. "Look at it," Eva said quietly. Isaiah stopped beside her and looked. "It is a good piece of land," he said. "It is the best piece of land in this county," she said, with a conviction that had nothing to do with objectivity and everything to do with what it had cost her. He smiled. He had a very good smile, she had thought so for weeks, a slow, careful smile that changed his whole face. They went inside. The boys came back with Ferris in the late afternoon, and Eva told them the news, told them in plain language that the land was theirs and no one could take it. Thomas received this information with a 9-year-old's attempt at dignified composure and then burst into tears that he immediately tried to suppress, which made Eva take him by the shoulders and say, "It is all right, Thomas. You can be glad about it." He cried for about 45 seconds and then was done, and wiped his face on his sleeve with great efficiency. Samuel did not fully understand the legal dimensions of the situation, but understood his brother's tears and his mother's bright eyes and Isaiah's presence and the general feeling of the room, and he said, with total confidence, "The cowboy fixed it." Isaiah, who had been leaning in the doorway with his hat in his hand, looked at Samuel and said, "You helped. You kept your mother company the whole time." Samuel considered this seriously and decided he was satisfied with it. Ferris, who had been watching all of this from under her bonnet, looked at Eva and then at Isaiah and then at Eva again, and said, with the precision of a woman who had been watching people for 60 years, "Well then." That was all she said. It was enough. In the days after the court ruling, something changed in the homestead's atmosphere, a lightness that was not giddiness but was real, a sense of something breathable in the air that had not been there before. Eva found herself moving through her days with less weight on her. Not less work, not less difficulty, because homesteading in 1878 was always and perpetually difficult, but less dread. Less of that constant low-grade fear that had lived in her chest for 3 years like a stone she had swallowed and could not pass. She and Isaiah continued as they had been, him working the property and living in the barn, her running the house and the boys and the livestock, both of them talking in the mornings and the evenings and sometimes in the middle of the day when he came to the well, and she was hanging washing and they stopped and said something to each other and then a little more, and then the washing took twice as long as it should have. He was courting her and she was letting him court her, and they both knew what they were doing. He found small ways. He was not a man given to grand gestures, which she respected, because grand gestures were easy and consistency was not. He brought her a single wildflower one morning in December, which meant he had walked some distance to find it along the creek bank where the sheltered spots still sometimes produced them. He set it on the kitchen table without comment, and she found it when she came in from the morning milking and stood and looked at it for a long time. He read to her. This surprised her. She had not expected it. But one evening she came out to the porch and found him sitting with a book of natural history that had been on her shelf, one of the few books she had managed to acquire, and he looked up and said, "Would you like me to read some of this?" And she sat down beside him on the porch and he read, his voice low and unhurried, and the evening gathered around them, and she leaned her head back against the wall of the house and closed her eyes and listened to his voice, the way she had listened to the creek that morning, the same quality of contentment in both. He asked about her childhood, not prying, asking. She told him about growing up in central Tennessee, about her father's farm, about her mother who had been a school teacher before marriage and who had taught Eva to read from good books and to think carefully and to know her own mind. She told him about coming to Texas at 17 with Harlan, who had been 23 and had a claim on land and optimism about what to do with it. He told her, in pieces and over time, about Kentucky, about a father who had not been kind and a childhood that had been, in his careful language, difficult, about leaving at 18 because staying was not survivable, about the years of work for hire cattle drives, law work, eventually the land trust business, which had paid better than it had deserved to, about the way he had moved through those years without settling, the way water moves through dry ground, always going elsewhere. "Did you ever want to stop?" she asked. "I did not know what stopping looked like," he said. She looked at him. "Do you now?" He looked at her. "I think I might." Christmas came, a spare Christmas, the way Christmas on a frontier homestead in lean times always was, but not an unhappy one. Eva made gingerbread with flour she had been saving, and Samuel ate so much of it before dinner that he fell asleep in his chair, which made Thomas convulse with quiet, superior 9-year-old laughter. Isaiah had ridden to Lockhart the week before and come back with something he would not show anyone and had kept in his saddlebag. And on Christmas morning he produced 2 carved wooden horses, one for each boy, that he had made himself from a piece of cedar he had found by the creek. They were good, not expert work, not the work of a craftsman, but good and careful, and clearly made by someone who had paid attention to what horses actually looked like. Thomas held his and said very seriously, "You made these?" "I did," Isaiah said. "They are very good," Thomas said with the gravity of a connoisseur, and went back to studying it. Eva stood in the kitchen doorway and watched the 3 of them by the morning fire and felt the full weight of what she was looking at, what it meant, what it could mean, what she wanted it to mean, and she thought about her mother and what her mother would have said about a man who carved horses for children on Christmas morning with no motive more complicated than wanting them to have something. Her mother would have liked him, she thought. Her mother would have said, "There is the plain truth of a person in what they do when nothing is required of them." She brought coffee and sat down near the fire, and when Isaiah looked up at her from across the room she did not look away, and neither did he. In January she asked him to move out of the barn. He was quiet for a moment when she said it. "There is a room off the back," she said. "It was a storage room. I cleared it out last week. It is small, but it is warm, and it is not a barn." He looked at her carefully. "Eva, I know what I am saying," she said. "The boys, Thomas knows what he thinks about the situation," she said. "I am their mother. I decide what is appropriate for this household." He was quiet again. Then he said, "I do not want to put you in a difficult position. In town. What people will say. People in town can say whatever they like," she said evenly. "I have been managing my reputation in this county alone for 3 years. I think I know how to handle it." A pause. "That is true. And besides," she said, and her voice softened slightly, "you have been working this land and living in that barn since November. Anyone paying attention can see what this is." "What is it?" he asked. He asked it carefully, like a man who wanted to be sure. She met his eyes. "It is a man who loves this land and intends to stay on it," she said, "and a woman who loves that man and intends to let him." The silence between them was very full. He stood up from the table and crossed the room to her and took both her hands in his. He had not done that before, taken both her hands, and the weight and warmth of it were different from anything a single hand could accomplish, and he said, "Eva Prescott." "Isaiah Dalton," she said. "I would like to ask you to marry me," he said. "Not as a matter of practicality, not because of the land or the boys or what people will think. I would like to ask you because I rode up your road thinking I was going to take something from you, and instead you—" He stopped. There was something bright in his eyes that he was very resolutely not allowing to become tears, and she loved him for the effort. "You gave me something back, without meaning to. You just—" He looked at their joined hands. "You showed me what a person could be." Eva breathed. She breathed again. The fire was burning behind her and the winter sun was coming through the east window, and one of the horses in the paddock was calling about something in the high specific way horses had, and all of it, every detail of this ordinary extraordinary morning, was fixing itself permanently in her memory. "Yes," she said. He looked up at her. "Yes," she said again. "Obviously yes." He laughed, that good laugh she had been collecting since November, and pulled her toward him, and she went willingly, and his arms came around her, and she let herself be held, really held, for the first time in a very long time, and it was the most purely right thing she had felt in years. Thomas, who had some gift for appearing in doorways at significant moments, appeared in the doorway. He looked at his mother being embraced by Isaiah. He considered the situation with 9-year-old thoroughness. "Are you going to be our father?" he asked Isaiah in a tone that was neither hostile nor sentimental but simply direct. Isaiah looked at Eva. Eva looked at Isaiah. "Would you like me to be?" Isaiah asked Thomas. Thomas thought about this for a long time. Then he said, "You know how to fix things and you are honest. Those are the main things." "I will keep working on them," Isaiah said. Thomas nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to his wooden horse. They married in March, when the hill country had begun its spring green, and the bluebonnets were coming up along the roadsides in that extravagant Texas way that made it hard to believe the same ground had been iron-hard and dry not 6 weeks before. The wedding was small Frederick Marsh and his wife, Mee Ferris, 2 neighboring families who had been Eva's closest friends in the county, and a preacher from Lockhart named Simmons who had a good voice and a sensible approach to ceremony. Eva wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had traded a side of bacon for with the seamstress in Lockhart, a deep blue that she did not own anything else in because Harlan had not liked her in blue. She wore her hair up but left 2 pieces of it down at the sides, because she had always liked it that way and no longer had any reason not to. Isaiah wore the best clothes he owned, which were not extravagant, and had shaved that morning with particular care, and when he saw her come out of the house, he looked at her in a way that she felt in her bones. They stood in front of the preacher in the yard of her homestead, their homestead, with the pecan trees behind them and the bluebonnets pushing up through the fence line and the boys on either side of them, Thomas serious and Samuel holding his wooden horse, and they said what needed to be said. When Simmons told Isaiah he could kiss the bride, Isaiah took her face in both hands, the way you handle something you have been very careful about for a long time, and kissed her, and she kissed him back. And Mee Ferris made a sound that was not quite crying but was related to it, and Samuel asked loudly, "Is the cowboy our papa now? which made everyone laugh, including the preacher. Isaiah crouched down to Samuel's level and said, very seriously, "I am your papa now if you want me to be." Samuel held up the wooden horse. "You made this for me," he said, as if that settled the matter. "I did," Isaiah said. Samuel nodded. "Then yes." The spring and summer that followed were the best stretch of time Eva could remember in years, maybe ever, in terms of a day-to-day quality of being alive that she had never quite accessed before. The land, now free and clear, felt different to work. She did not know how to explain that except that it was true. The same soil, the same creek, the same pecan trees, but without the weight of possible loss pressing down on it. It was a different kind of beautiful. Isaiah was a full partner in the property, in every real sense. He had clear ideas about improving the cattle operation. He wanted to bring in a small herd of better quality stock and stop relying purely on the existing mixed cattle. And Eva had clear ideas about expanding the kitchen garden to a market scale, because Lockhart's population was growing, and there was more demand for fresh produce than the town could currently supply. They talked through every decision together at the kitchen table in the evening, with the boys doing their lessons nearby, and sometimes they disagreed, and those disagreements were real ones that required thought and compromise, and she found that she respected him more, not less, every time they navigated one. Thomas, at 10 now, had taken on legitimate responsibilities around the property. He was serious about them in the way he was serious about everything, with a focused attention that made Isaiah remark once that Thomas would be a formidable man when he got there. Eva said that he already was, in the ways that counted. Samuel, who turned 7 in August, had his mother's brightness and his stepfather's patience, and a disposition toward happiness that both of them found quietly astonishing, given what the first years of his life had looked like. Garrett Cole's case worked its way through the district court system through the spring and into summer. He was ultimately convicted of fraud in the recording of public instruments and ordered to pay significant penalties. His county influence, which had rested on the foundation of complicit officials like Marcus Hale, crumbled considerably. He was not destroyed. Men of his wealth and connections were rarely destroyed, but he was diminished, and he did not bother the Prescott homestead again. Isaiah had given testimony in the district case, long, careful testimony about his time working for Cole and the trust, and he had given it without flinching, even when Cole's lawyers tried again to characterize him as a disgruntled employee with personal motives. The judge had found his testimony credible and specific, and his character unblemished by the cross-examination, which Frederick Marsh later said with some satisfaction was because it was actually unblemished. On a September evening, with the harvest coming in and the pecans falling and the air carrying that first thin note of autumn, Eva and Isaiah sat on the porch steps the same way they had sat there months ago when everything was uncertain and difficult, and the difference between then and now was so complete that Eva kept having to locate herself in the present to make sure it was real. She was leaning against his shoulder. His arm was around her. They were watching the boys, Thomas chasing fireflies and Samuel trying to catch a bullfrog by the fence, and the sky was going from orange to deep blue above the tree line. "I have been thinking," she said. "What about?" he said. "The back pasture, the 40 acres we are not using. I want to fence it separately and rotate the cattle through it the way you were describing. I think you are right about the overgrazing in the south field." He was quiet for a moment, and she could feel the smile in it even without looking. "I was wondering when you were going to come around on that," he said. "I came around on it 2 weeks ago," she said. "I was just taking my time saying so." He laughed. She felt it against her shoulder. "Isaiah," she said in a different voice. He heard the difference. He turned to look at her. She looked at him in the last of the evening light, this man who had ridden up her road to take everything she had and had instead given everything he had, and she said quietly, "I think we are going to have a baby." The world went very still for a moment, the kind of still that is actually very loud internally. He looked at her. "Eva," he said. "I am not certain yet," she said, "But I think so." He took her face in his hands the same way he had on their wedding day, the same careful, complete way, and she saw in his eyes everything she needed to see, not just happiness, though it was that, but something deeper, something that was about becoming and about being new and about the specific weight of a life being rebuilt out of the materials of a life nearly lost. He kissed her forehead. He held her face. He said against her hair, "That is the best thing." "Yes," she said, "it is." Thomas came running across the dark yard with a cupped firefly and held it up in a lantern of his own making, two small hands letting out a prick of light, and looked at his mother and his stepfather on the steps and said, with the awareness of a boy who had been watching adults for years, "What happened?" Eva looked at Isaiah. Isaiah looked at Eva. "Something good," Eva said. Thomas considered this. Then he let the firefly go and sat down on the step below them and said, "Tell me." So she did. She told him, and then Isaiah told Samuel, who had come trotting over with muddy boots and the news about the bullfrog. And Samuel listened with his mouth making a small O, and then said that the baby had better sleep in the room with Thomas, because his room was too small. Thomas said that was not going to happen. They argued about it with great enthusiasm and zero rancor, and Isaiah and Eva sat on the steps and let them argue, and the fireflies came up in the dark around them, and the September night was warm and full and completely resolved, the way the best nights are. The baby came in April, which felt right because April in the Texas Hill Country was the most relentless season of beauty, and because spring beginnings had always meant something to Eva. It was a boy. They named him James, after no one in particular, but because it was a good plain name that sounded like it would serve a person well across a lifetime. Thomas received him with the gravitas of an eldest child who has considered his position and found it satisfactory. He held the baby for exactly 30 seconds and then handed him back to his mother and said, with great finality, "He is very small." "He will get bigger," Isaiah told him. "He had better," Thomas said. Samuel was less restrained. Samuel cried, though he would not admit it was crying, and insisted later that something had gotten in his eye, and then spent the next 3 days trying to show baby James his wooden horse, undaunted by the fact that James was entirely unable to appreciate it. Ferris came and stayed for 2 weeks and cooked and cleaned and held the baby and told Eva things about the first weeks of a new baby that were useful and true. And when she left, she took Eva's hands and held them and said, "Your mother would be very proud of you." Eva had not cried when the judge ruled in her favor. She cried a little then. The homestead that spring was loud and full and beautiful in the way that only places where children are growing can be. Isaiah had expanded the cattle operation as planned, bringing in 15 head of good quality stock from a cellar in San Antonio, and the rotation system in the back pasture was working the way he had predicted. Eva's kitchen garden had grown to the point where she was sending produce to Lockhart twice a week on the wagon, and the income from it had become a real and meaningful part of their household finances. Frederick Marsh came out to visit in May, as he sometimes did, and sat on the porch and drank coffee, and told them that the district case against Cole had been fully concluded, and that Cole had paid his penalties and retreated to his central holdings and was not expected to trouble the southern end of the county again. Marsh had a way of delivering good news that was very dry and factual, which somehow made it feel more satisfying. After Marsh left, Eva stood at the porch rail with James against her shoulder and looked out at the property, the fences, the fields, the barn, the garden, the creek bend with its row of old pecans, and did what she had not let herself do for a very long time. She counted it as hers, completely and really hers, without terror at the back of the counting. Isaiah came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned to look at him. He was sun-browned and tired from the morning's work, and he was the most familiar and beloved sight in her daily world. "I am thinking about that first night," she said, "when you came up the road." He smiled a little. "I am thinking about it too." "You were going to burn my contract," she said. "I was going to deliver a fraudulent reclamation notice," he corrected. "There is a difference." And instead, she said, I burned it. You burned it, he said. She looked out at the land again. Baby James made a small sound against her shoulder and she patted his back absently. I was reading it to the boys, she said. The contract. I read it to them every few months because I wanted them to know exactly what our situation was. I did not want them to be surprised by hard things. She paused. Thomas heard me reading it the night you came. He asked me what reclamation meant. What did you tell him? I told him it meant they take the land back, she said. And then I told him we were going to keep it. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that was the right thing to say. It was the right thing to do, too, she said. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. You sat down on the steps that night, you know. When I told you to go inside and I made coffee, and the boys came out to look at you, Thomas came and looked at you, and you looked back at him without flinching. She paused. That was when I started to think you might be different than what I expected. I sat down because you did not seem like the kind of woman it was possible to loom over, he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, full and easy, the kind she had more of these days. I am not, she agreed. He took her free hand, the one not supporting the baby, and held it, and they stood there at the porch rail of their home in the May morning with the land open before them, and the boys' voices coming from somewhere behind the barn and the baby drowsing against her shoulder. And it was not dramatic, and it was not a grand thing. It was simply what a life looked like when it had been built by two people who understood its value. The summer deepened, and the pecan trees went full and green along the creek. Thomas turned 11 in July with a celebration that involved me Ferris's pound cake and a new pocket knife from Isaiah, which Thomas received with the kind of shining gratitude that children sometimes show when a gift tells them something important about how they are seen. Isaiah had given him a pocket knife rather than a toy, which meant he saw Thomas as beginning the transition from boy to young man, which was exactly what Thomas had been waiting for someone to notice. Samuel, who would turn 8 in August, had started school properly that fall, riding in with Thomas each morning on the older draft horse, now 23 years old and very steady. He was a social and happy student, his teacher reported, which surprised no one. Eva sometimes thought about what it would look like from the outside this homestead, this family, and what a person riding up the road would see. They would see 160 acres in good shape and getting better. They would see a house that was being maintained and expanded. They would see a kitchen garden that had become a modest enterprise. They would see 2 boys and a baby and a man, and a woman who moved through their shared days with the ease and purpose of people who had made something real. What they would not see, because it was on the inside, was everything it had cost. The 3 years of Eva alone, the grief for Harlan that had never been quite what grief was supposed to be, the fear that had lived in her chest like a stone, the contract that she had read aloud to her boys so they would know their situation exactly. The man who had come up her road one evening in July 1878 to take that situation from her and had, instead, given her everything else. She thought about it sometimes. She did not think about it sadly. She thought about it the way you think about the hard passages of a book that you have read all the way to the end, with gratitude for the difficulty of it, because without the difficulty the ending would mean less. In the autumn of the 2nd year of their marriage, when the pecans were falling again, and James was toddling on uncertain legs through the kitchen and Thomas was 12, and looking less like a child every week, Eva walked out to the creek one evening just before sundown and sat on the flat rock that had been her thinking place since she first came to this land. The creek was running clear and low after the summer dry. The light coming through the pecan trees was gold and horizontal, the specific evening gold of that latitude and that season that she had come to love as a particular kind of beauty, not general but particular, the beauty of this place. She heard him coming before she saw him. He was always somewhat quiet, but she had learned the particular sound of him, the cadence of his step, the way his boot heels came down on the ground. He sat down on the flat rock beside her. They watched the creek for a while. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She considered. "About what a person is worth," she said. He looked at her. Not in a dark way, she said quickly. I mean what we amount to, what all of it amounts to. She gestured vaguely at the land, the sky, the creek. I spent 3 years on this land alone, and I thought about it so differently then. I thought about survival and holding on. I thought about what I owed and what I might lose. She paused. I did not think much about what I was building because it did not feel safe to think that way. And now, he said, now I think about it all the time, she said. What we are building, what Thomas and Samuel and James will have, what it means to hand something on. She looked at him. I think that is the difference, not the land, the ability to think past the holding on. He was quiet for a long time. The creek moved. The light changed. Eva, he said, yes, I want to tell you something. Tell it. He looked at the water. When I was young, I did not think I would amount to anything worth noting. I do not say that for sympathy. It is just what I believed. I spent a long time working for men who were, by almost any measure, worse than me and telling myself that was just how it was. He paused. When I rode up your road, I was 31 years old and I had nothing to show for it except a horse and a saddlebag and a job I was ashamed of. He looked at her. You are the bravest person I have ever known, he said. Not because you stood at your door, but because you kept going. Every single day alone, with 2 boys and a piece of land and a contract that told you might lose it, and you just kept going. You did not give up the land. You did not give up your sons. You did not give up on the possibility that things could get better. He shook his head slowly. I watched you do that and I thought, I want to be that. I want to be the kind of person who keeps going towards something that is worth keeping. She looked at him in the creek light, this man she had built a life with, and felt the full weight of what they had together, not romantic weight, but life weight, the weight of real things really made. You are that, she said quietly. You have been that since the day you burned that notice. You burned it, he said. You handed it to me, she said. He smiled. She smiled. The light finished its turn from gold to the deep quiet of early evening. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They sat by the creek in the cooling air and listened to the water and watched the first star come up above the eastern tree line. And from the house behind them, they could hear the thin, high voices of the boys calling each other about something entirely ordinary and entirely irreplaceable. I think we should build a proper room onto the south side, Eva said after a while. For when James is old enough to need his own space. She stopped. He looked at her sideways. She looked at him sideways. Before we need the room for other reasons, he said. There may be other reasons, she said calmly. He said nothing. Then he started laughing quietly into the darkening evening, and she joined him, and the creek ran on, and the star was joined by another. And behind them the lamp in the house window came on as Thomas lit it for the evening, steady and gold and warm against the coming night. The room was built in the spring, wide-doored and well-lit, with a window that looked out over the garden. Isaiah built it himself with Thomas's help, and the occasional contribution of old neighbors who came and worked a raising day the way people did in that country, when someone had a job worth doing. Samuel handed nails and offered opinions. James toddled among the workers' feet and was relocated multiple times to the kitchen, from which he escaped multiple times with the purposeful persistence of a boy who had decided that something interesting was happening, and he intended to be part of it. The room was finished in April, and in August, a girl was born. They named her Ruth, for Eva's mother whose middle name it had been, and she came into the world with a voice that left no doubt about her presence, and a grip on Isaiah's finger in the first minutes of her life, that he described later as the strongest thing he had encountered. Thomas held her with the concentrated seriousness of an older brother determined to do it correctly. Samuel said she was better than he expected, which was high praise from Samuel. James looked at her for a long time and then looked at his mother and said, "More," in a tone that suggested this was his preferred approach to family size. Isaiah, sitting on the edge of the bed with Eva after the midwife had gone, and the boys had been fed and the lamp was burning low, held Ruth in one arm and Eva's hand in his other, and looked at this woman who had stood at her door with a receipt book and not backed down, who had read her contract aloud to her children so they would know the truth of their situation, who had taken a fraudulent notice and put it in the fire. And he thought about how many things had to have gone exactly as they did for him to be sitting here in this room on this land with this family. "Are you all right?" Eva asked. Her voice was soft and tired and happy. "I am more than all right," he said. She squeezed his hand. Outside the window, the August night was full of sound insects and wind and the distant call of something in the creek bend, and somewhere in the house a door closing softly as Thomas, ever practical, made sure everything was latched for the night. "Isaiah," she said. "Yes." "I am glad you came up that road," she said, "even the way you came." He looked at the baby, he looked at her. "So am I," he said, "every day." The years that followed were years of the kind that are hard to write about because their beauty is in the accumulation of ordinary things, the way a farm grows in good soil, the way children grow in a good home, the way two people learn each other so completely that the word love becomes almost too simple for what they are. The cattle operation grew. The kitchen garden became known in Lockhart as the best produce source in the county. Thomas grew tall and serious and capable, and at 15 was running significant parts of the ranch with a competence that made his mother unspeakably proud. Samuel grew bright and social, and went to the school in Lockhart on a scholarship from the county's new education fund, and came home on weekends with ideas that started arguments at dinner, which everyone secretly enjoyed. James became, at 4 and 5, a solid and cheerful person with his father's stillness and his mother's determination, already demonstrating a particular gift for dealing with livestock that suggested he would be, one day, very good at the work that mattered most on this land. Ruth grew into herself with the confidence of a girl who had been held and valued from her first moment, and her voice, that extraordinary voice that had announced her entry into the world, grew with her into something that filled rooms and drew people in and made you listen. Eva and Isaiah grew toward each other the way things grow in good conditions, not dramatically, not with the intensity of new love, but completely and continuously, the way roots grow, deepening. There was a morning in the late summer of 1882, 4 years after Isaiah had ridden up the road with a piece of paper he was going to use to take her home, when Eva came out to the porch in the early light before anyone else was awake, with her coffee, and stood at the rail and looked at the land. The pecan trees were full and heavy with the late-season nuts. The creek was running well after a good rainy spring. The new south room was open and breathing in the warm air. The barn was solid and the paddocks were right and the garden was green and productive, and the whole of it was, by any measure she had ever had for such things, as close to what she had hoped for as she could possibly account for. She heard the door behind her and did not need to turn around. Isaiah came to stand beside her. He was barefoot in his work clothes with his coffee, and he was looking at the land the same way she was. They stood there together in the early quiet, before the children were up and before the day required anything of them, in the specific peace that exists in the early morning on a piece of land that is truly yours, that no one can take, that has been made and defended and loved and made larger. He reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his. The sun was coming up over the east tree line, the same way it had come up over those trees for all the years before either of them was here, and all the years since, and all the years still to come. Gold and patient and certain. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said, and it was.